The stars called to humans, and they answered. For 50 years, Earth ships traveled space, finding many alien friends. But the Vastracs were different. They looked like giant tigers walking on two legs. Their teeth could bite through metal. Their claws could rip open ship hulls. They were smart, built spaceships, and ruled many planets. The Vastracs thought fighting was the most important thing in life. When humans first met the Vastracs, the aliens weren't impressed. Humans had no claws, no sharp teeth, no thick fur. To the Vastracs, humans looked like prey, not equals. Jewu Park didn't mind. She was the commander of Horizon 7, a human space station near Vastracs territory. She was short but strong, with calm eyes and steady hands. For 3 years, she worked to make friends with the Vastracs, learning their customs and battle songs. Patience wins more battles than strength, Jewu often told her crew when they got frustrated with the difficult aliens. Slowly, the Vastracs began to respect Jewu. They allowed small trade meetings. They shared stories of great hunts. But one rule never changed. No human was ever allowed to see Vastracs cubs. The aliens protected their young fiercely, hiding them from all other species. On a quiet Tuesday, alarms blared across Horizon 7. A Vastrac ship was approaching fast, damaged and leaking fuel. Emergency landing approved, Jewu said, watching the wounded ship limp toward the station. When the airlock opened, 7 tall Vastracs warriors stepped out. Their fur was singed, and one limped badly. In the middle stood the biggest Vastracs Jewu had ever seen. His orange and black striped fur was decorated with metal rings, and a scar ran across his face. War Chief Krax, Jewu said, bowing exactly as Vastrac's custom required. We welcome you to Horizon 7. Krax's yellow eyes narrowed. Human Commander, our ship requires repair. We will stay until it is fixed. That's when Jewu noticed movement behind the warriors. 3 small shapes, barely reaching the adult's knees, peeked from behind Krax's legs. They had oversized paws and curious eyes that glowed in the dim light. Cubs. Vastracs cubs on a human station. Jewu carefully kept her face neutral, though her heart raced. No human had ever been allowed this close to Vastrac's young. Of course, she said calmly. We have quarters prepared. Krax growled softly. The journey was unexpected. These 3 should not be here, but we had no choice. He moved slightly, revealing the cubs more clearly. They had bright stripes of blue and green in their fur, unlike the adults' orange patterns. No human will approach them, Krax warned. They will stay in our quarters at all times. Jewu nodded. I understand completely. Your young one's safety is our highest priority. Over the next few days, the station engineers worked to fix the Vastrac ship. Jewu kept her distance, respecting their space. But she couldn't help watching from afar as Krax and his warriors moved through the station, the cubs always carefully guarded in the middle of their group. The smallest cub, with bright blue stripes, seemed the most curious. It often tried to wander off to examine the strange human surroundings. Once, it looked directly at Jewu and made a small chirping sound before being hurried away by an alarmed adult. On the 5th day, Krax requested a meeting with Jewu. Your engineers work well, he said when they met in the conference room. The ship will be ready soon. I'm glad to hear it, Jewu replied. Krax watched her with those unblinking yellow eyes. You have respected our ways. Your people have not tried to see the cubs. Of course not. That's your right as parents. Krax's ears flicked forward, a sign of surprise. You understand parenthood. Jewu smiled. Humans value our children above all else. We might not have claws or fangs, but we would die protecting our young. Perhaps we are not so different in that way. For the first time, Krax looked at Jewu as if truly seeing her. Perhaps, he rumbled. Tomorrow, when our repairs are complete, I will allow you, only you, to meet the cubs properly. It would be educational for them to see that not all species are enemies. Jaiwu bowed deeply, understanding the enormous honor being offered. I would be most grateful, War Chief. Neither of them knew then that this small step, a human meeting Vastrax cubs, would change the relationship between their species forever. And neither could guess that in just 7 days, disaster would strike Horizon 7, putting those precious cubs in terrible danger. Jiwoo smiled as she watched the Vastrax cubs playing in their special room. After 2 weeks on Horizon 7, the aliens had relaxed their strict rules a little. The cubs were allowed to explore a small section of the station, always with guards nearby. The smallest cub, the one with blue stripes that Jiwoo had nicknamed Blue, seemed to recognize her now and would chirp happily when she visited. The ship repairs were taking longer than expected. Something was wrong with the engine core, and human engineers were working with Vastrax technicians to fix it. Krax was not happy about the delay but had grown to trust Jiwoo and her crew. On this morning, Jiwoo was in the control room checking weather reports when the lights flickered. A moment later, a loud boom shook the entire station. Warning alarms began to scream. Status report, Jiwoo shouted over the noise. Power core malfunction in Section 4. Her second-in-command Taiho replied, fingers flying over the controls. We're losing power throughout the station. Oxygen recyclers are offline in multiple sections. Jiwoo grabbed her emergency tablet. Begin station evacuation procedures. Get everyone to the emergency shelters. The station shook again. More alarms joined the chorus. Commander, a voice crackled over her radio. War Chief Krax is trapped in Meeting Room 7. The doors are sealed due to the power failure, and oxygen levels are dropping fast. Jiwoo's heart sank. Where are his cubs? In the play area with their caretaker. But we just got a distress call. The caretaker was injured when part of the ceiling collapsed. Jiwoo raced from the control room, shouting orders as she ran. Tahoe, coordinate the evacuation. Get a rescue team to Krax right now. As she ran through the corridors, emergency lights cast everything in a red glow. People rushed past her toward the shelters. She passed a window and saw that smoke was pouring from one section of the station. Her radio crackled again. Commander, the path to the Cubs area is blocked. A support beam collapsed in Corridor B. What about the emergency teams? Jiwoo asked, not slowing her pace. All occupied with critical systems and injured personnel. We don't have anyone to spare, and the automatic fire systems in that section aren't working. Jiwoo stopped. She pulled up a station map on her tablet. The Cubs were alone, with toxic smoke filling their room. The only path was blocked. But there was another way. The maintenance tunnels that ran between the walls. I'm going to get the Cubs, she said into her radio. Commander, that's against protocol. The Vastrax. The Vastrax will kill us all if we let their cubs die. I'm going. Jiwoo ran to a small door labeled Maintenance Access, Authorized Personnel Only. She pressed her hand to the scanner and the door slid open, revealing a narrow tunnel lit by dim emergency lights. She climbed in. The tunnel was barely big enough for her to crawl through. It was designed for repair robots and the occasional human technician. The full-grown Vastrax would never fit. I'm in the tunnels, she reported, heading toward Section 6 where the Cubs are. Jiwoo crawled as fast as she could. The metal was hot under her hands. She could smell smoke in the air, getting stronger as she moved forward. After 5 minutes of crawling, she reached a junction. According to her map, the Cubs' room was just below her. She found a small hatch and opened it. Smoke immediately poured into the tunnel, making her cough and her eyes water. Jiwoo pulled her shirt up over her mouth and nose. She couldn't see much through the smoke, but she could hear frightened chirping sounds from below. Without hesitation, she dropped down into the room. The smoke was thick here, rolling along the ceiling. The emergency lights were barely visible through the haze. Jiwoo crouched low where the air was clearer and called out, Cubs, where are you? A frightened chirp answered her, Following the sound, Jiwoo crawled across the floor until she found them. All 3 cubs were huddled together under a table, eyes wide with fear. Their caretaker lay unconscious nearby, blood trickling from a head wound. "It's okay," Jiwoo said softly, knowing they wouldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone would calm them. "I'm going to help you." Blue recognized her and chirped again, but the other 2 hissed in fear, showing their tiny sharp teeth. Jiwoo knew that touching Vastrax cubs was strictly forbidden to all non-Vastrax. But there was no choice. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but we need to leave now." She reached toward them slowly. Blue came to her first, pressing against her hand. The other 2 watched, hissing softly. The smoke was getting thicker. Time was running out. Jiwoo removed her jacket and made a small pouch. With gentle movements, she scooped up Blue first, then the other 2. They were heavier than she expected, each one like a solid ball of muscle. "Hold on," she whispered to the frightened cubs. "We're going to see your father soon." With the precious bundle cradled against her chest, Jiwoo looked up at the open hatch. Now came the hard part, getting back up there with 3 scared Vastrax cubs. Jiwoo stood in the smoky room, looking up at the maintenance hatch. It seemed impossibly high now with 3 scared cubs in her makeshift sling. The smallest cub, Blue, poked its head out and made a soft chirping sound. "I know, little one. We need to get out of here," Jiwoo said. The smoke was getting thicker. Jiwoo's eyes burned and her chest felt tight. She looked around and spotted a small table that hadn't been overturned. She dragged it under the hatch and climbed up, balancing carefully with her precious bundle. The cubs were frightened. They squirmed and made high-pitched sounds that broke Jiwoo's heart. The largest cub, with green stripes, suddenly nipped at her hand. Jiwoo felt sharp teeth break her skin, but she didn't let go. "I understand you're scared," she whispered, "but please trust me." With one arm holding the cubs close to her chest, Jiwoo reached up and grabbed the edge of the open hatch. Her muscles strained as she pulled herself up. The cubs hissed and wriggled, making it harder to climb. Finally, with a last push of strength, she hauled herself and the cubs into the maintenance tunnel. Jiwoo lay there for a moment, catching her breath. The air was clearer here, but she could still smell smoke. The station's emergency system spoke overhead. "Warning. Oxygen levels declining in Section 6. All personnel evacuate immediately." "Time to move, little ones," Jiwoo said to the cubs. She began crawling through the narrow tunnel, pushing the bundle of cubs ahead of her. The tunnel curved upward, making the journey harder. The cubs had settled a bit, though they still made worried sounds. Blue seemed to understand they were being helped and kept the other 2 calmer. Jiwoo's radio crackled. "Commander Park, what's your status?" "I have the cubs," she said between breaths. "In the maintenance tunnels, heading toward Junction 4. Be careful. We're getting readings of structural damage in that section." Jiwoo crawled faster. The cubs' glowing eyes looked back at her in the dim light, like 6 small amber lamps. Their scales caught what little light there was, shimmering with blues and greens. When she reached Junction 4, Jiwoo saw the problem. Part of the tunnel ahead had collapsed. There was only a small gap, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. "Junction 4 is partially blocked," she reported, looking for another route. "There isn't one, Commander," came the reply. "All other paths from your location are completely sealed. Can you go back?" Jiwoo looked behind her. Smoke was now filling the tunnel she had just traveled through. Going back wasn't an option. "No choice but to go forward," she said. Jiwoo examined the gap. It was tight, but possible. The cubs could fit easily, but getting them through safely would be the challenge. "Okay, little ones. New plan." She adjusted her jacket sling to make it more secure, then tied the sleeves together. The cubs watched her with those bright eyes, sensing her tension. Jiwoo lay flat on her stomach and pushed the bundle of cubs toward the gap. Go through, she encouraged, though she knew they couldn't understand. Surprisingly, Blue seemed to get the idea. The small cub squirmed forward, pulling the others along. Jiwoo pushed gently, helping them through the narrow space. Once they were on the other side, she began to squeeze through herself. It was tighter than she expected. Metal edges scraped against her back and shoulders. Halfway through, she felt stuck. The oxygen alert beeped on her wrist device. The air was getting thinner. Jiwoo pushed harder, ignoring the pain as metal cut into her skin. With one final effort, she forced herself through the gap. The cubs were waiting on the other side, still in their sling. Jiwoo picked them up, relieved, and continued crawling. Her uniform was torn, and she could feel blood running down her back. But that didn't matter now. Not much further, she told the cubs. The tunnel began to slope downward, making the journey easier. Jiwoo's vision was starting to blur from lack of oxygen. Her lungs burned with each breath. The cubs were quiet now, perhaps feeling the effects of the bad air too. After what seemed like forever, Jiwoo saw light ahead. The exit hatch. With her last strength, she crawled toward it and pushed it open. Fresh air rushed in. Jiwoo gasped, filling her lungs. She tumbled out of the tunnel into a corridor, still clutching the cubs. Commander Park. Someone was running toward her. Medical team. Here now. Jiwoo looked down at the cubs. They were all breathing, their eyes still bright. As she tried to unwrap them from her jacket, she noticed her arms were covered in small cuts and bites where the frightened cubs had clawed her. The green-striped cub suddenly licked her hand where it had bitten her earlier. The gesture was so unexpected that Jiwoo smiled despite her pain. "Commander, are you all right?" A medic knelt beside her. "The cubs," Jiwoo whispered. "Get them to Cracks. War Chief Cracks is safe. He's in medical bay too." Jiwoo nodded, relief washing over her. "Take them to him, but be careful. Don't touch them directly. Use my jacket to carry them." As the medical team carefully took the bundle of cubs, Jiwoo's vision began to darken. The last thing she saw was Blue's bright eyes watching her as the little cub was carried away. "Safe now," she whispered as she slipped into unconsciousness. "You're all safe now." Jiwoo felt pain before she opened her eyes. Her arms stung. Her chest hurt when she breathed. Her head pounded. Slowly, she became aware of beeping machines and the smell of antiseptic. When she finally opened her eyes, she blinked in confusion. A huge figure blocked the light. Someone was standing over her bed. Someone very tall and broad with striped fur. War Chief Cracks. Jiwoo tried to sit up, but pain shot through her body. She remembered the cubs, the smoke, the tight tunnels. Had she saved them in time? "Do not move, human," Cracks said. His deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. Jiwoo lay back, suddenly afraid. She had touched Vastrax's cubs, the highest taboo. Even though she did it to save them, she had broken their most sacred rule. Cracks could demand her life as payment. "The cubs?" she asked, her voice rough from smoke. "They are well," Cracks said. "They suffer no injuries." Relief flooded through Jiwoo. "I'm glad," she whispered. Cracks stepped closer to her bed. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His yellow eyes studied her face. His claws could rip through metal, and now they were inches from her throat. "Human," he said, "you have done what no non-Vastrax has ever been permitted. You touched the future of my bloodline." Jiwoo swallowed hard. There was no choice. The smoke was getting worse. "I couldn't leave them." Cracks raised a massive clawed hand, stopping her words. Jiwoo tensed, wondering if this was how she would die. But Cracks didn't strike. Instead, he seemed to be considering his words carefully. "For many seasons, I have watched humans," he said. "I have seen how your kind treats your young. How humans will sacrifice for offspring not their own. We believe this weakness." He paused, his ears flicking forward. "Today I see it differently." Jiwoo didn't know what to say. This was not the reaction she had expected. My kind values strength, Krax continued. We respect those who can fight, who can kill. This is why we thought humans were lesser beings. You have no claws. Your teeth are flat. Your skin tears easily. He gestured to Jiwu's bandaged arms, evidence of how fragile humans were compared to the Vastrax. But you went alone into danger for cubs, not your own. This is a different kind of strength. Krax reached into a pouch at his belt. He pulled out something small that glinted in the light. He placed it carefully on Jiwu's bed next to her hand. It was a medallion, about the size of her palm. It was made of a strange metal that seemed to shift colors like oil on water. In the center was a symbol, curved lines that formed what looked like a stylized cat's eye. This is the mark of my clan, Krax explained. Among the Vastrax, this symbol is given only to those we trust with our cubs. It means you are family. Jiwu stared at the medallion, in shock. I don't know what to say. Say nothing. Actions speak louder than words. This is one thing our peoples share. Krax's mouth opened slightly, showing sharp teeth in what Jiwu realized was a Vastrax attempt at a smile. The smallest cub, the one with blue stripes, would not sleep until it saw you were safe. Krax said, "It has chosen you. Chosen me." Cubs sometimes form bonds with those who protect them. It is rare, but respected. Jiwu thought of Blue, the curious cub who had been first to trust her. Krax straightened to his full height. "The council will hear of this," he said. "They must understand what we have learned about humans today." "What have you learned?" Jiwu asked. "That strength comes in many forms. That the willingness to die for another's young is not weakness, but the greatest power." Krax's eyes seemed to glow brighter. "For generations, we have feared allowing others near our cubs. Perhaps this fear has been unnecessary." A small sound came from the doorway. Jiwu looked past Krax and saw 3 small shapes peering into the room. The cubs had come to check on her. "May they enter?" Krax asked, surprising Jiwu with the request. "Yes, of course," she answered. The cubs ran into the room, chirping excitedly. Blue jumped right onto Jiwu's bed, being careful of her injuries. The other 2 stayed close to Krax, but watched with interest. "My offspring will remember what you did," Krax said as Blue curled up next to Jiwu's side. "And so will all Vastrax, once I tell the council." Jiwu gently stroked Blue's soft fur, amazed at being allowed such a privilege. "Rest now, Jiwu Park," Krax said, using her name for the first time. "When you are well, we have much to discuss about the future of our peoples." As Krax turned to leave, Blue snuggled closer to Jiwu, purring softly. Something important had changed today, something that would reshape the relationship between humans and Vastrax forever. The Great Hall in Seoul was filled with beings from across the galaxy. Jiwu Park stood at the side of the room, watching nervously. It had been 6 months since the accident on Horizon 7. 6 months since she had saved the Vastrax cubs. Now representatives from 17 alien species sat in a half-circle, waiting for the meeting to begin. Jiwu touched the medallion hanging around her neck. The mark of Krax's clan caught the light, shifting colors like a living thing. She still couldn't believe she was here, representing humans at this historic meeting. The doors opened. War Chief Krax entered, his massive form commanding instant respect. Behind him came 6 other Vastrax, all wearing the metal rings and battle marks of high rank. At the back of the group were 3 young Vastrax, no longer tiny cubs, but not yet adults. Jiwu smiled when she saw them. Blue, now almost twice the size as when she had first met the cub, spotted Jiwu and chirped happily. The other delegates looked shocked at this display. Vastrax young never showed such comfort with other species. "Let us begin," said the galactic moderator, a tall, thin alien with silver skin. War Chief Krax of the Vastrax has called this special assembly. Krax stepped to the center of the room. His yellow eyes swept over the gathered aliens. For generations, we Vastracs have judged others by their fangs, their claws, their capacity for dominance. He began, his deep voice filling the hall. Humans possessed none of these, yet they have survived and thrived. We did not understand how, until now. He turned and gestured to Jiwoo. This human risked her life for cubs not of her species, with no benefit to herself or her bloodline. What we perceived as weakness, their softness, their empathy, is in fact their greatest strength. Murmurs spread through the hall. The Vastracs were known for their pride. No one had ever heard them speak of another species with such respect. I have consulted with our elders, Krax continued. We have studied human history. We have watched how they care for the young of many species on their own planet. Their strength is not in their bodies but in their hearts. The whispers grew louder. Jiwoo stood straighter, proud to represent humanity in this moment. Today, I announce a new path for the Vastracs, Krax declared. We will establish a cultural exchange program with humans. For the first time in our history, we will allow selected humans to serve as auxiliary caretakers for Vastracs cubs. The hall erupted in shocked gasps. One delegate stood up in protest. War Chief, this is unprecedented. No species has ever been trusted with Vastracs young. Krax's ears flattened, a sign of his determination. A species that will die to protect young ones, not their own, is a species that understands the true meaning of strength. Today marks the day the Vastracs acknowledge that humans are not prey, not merely allies, but guardians worthy of our highest trust. The galactic moderator was visibly stunned. This changes the balance of power in the galaxy. It should, Krax rumbled. For too long, we have measured power only in weapons and territory. Perhaps it is time to value other strengths. Jiwoo felt eyes on her and looked across the room. Blue was watching her intently. The young Vastracs blinked slowly, deliberately. Jiwoo had learned that this was how Vastracs showed deep affection. She blinked slowly back. After the formal meeting ended, delegates crowded around Jiwoo, asking questions about humans and the incident on Horizon 7. In the midst of this, Blue pushed through the crowd and stood before her. "Hello, Blue," Jiwoo said softly. The young Vastracs was now tall enough to look Jiwoo in the eyes. With careful movements, Blue reached out and touched the medallion at Jiwoo's neck. "Family," Blue said in halting human speech. It was the first word Jiwoo had heard any Vastracs cub speak. Tears filled Jiwoo's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Family." Krax approached, watching this exchange with approval. "My cub has been learning your language," he said. "The first of many bridges we will build." Jiwoo looked around the room, at the curious and sometimes worried faces of the other species. Change would not be easy, but it had begun. "How does it feel?" Krax asked, "to have changed the course of galactic history?" Jiwoo smiled. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what any human would do for a child in danger." "And that," Krax said, "is exactly why your species is remarkable." As Blue stood proudly beside her, Jiwoo understood that sometimes the greatest victories came not through force of arms, but through the simple, powerful act of compassion, the most human strength of all.